paraphrasing a famous opening line from another Beatus of the Church, John the 23rd, Holy Mother Church rejoices that the longed-for day has finally dawned when one of her daughters has been raised to the glory of the altars. That daughter, of course, is the woman about whom we are going to hear this afternoon from some of her daughters, the Sisters of St. Francis of Perpetual Adoration. I'm Dr. Adam DeVille, and the chairman of the Department of Philosophy and Theology, and I'm very delighted to welcome the sisters as part of our annual lecture series in the department to speak about the life and the beatification earlier this month of their foundress. I have two announcements and some brief introductions, and then we'll be in the sisters' capable hands. The table outside with the books and the pamphlets and the cards, the holy cards, all of that you're free to take for yourselves. And I will also be placing on that table this little basket at the sisters' request if you feel moved to make a free will offering this afternoon. As you may know, the sisters have a province in the Philippines, and as we've all heard in the past days, much of that country has been devastated by the typhoon. And so any donations this afternoon will be sent to the Philippine province of the sisters. We have 5 sisters, as you can see here this afternoon, presenting, and I will just introduce them and then turn it over. We begin, of course, on the end here with the president of the university, Sister Elise Kriss. Next to her is Sister Anita Holzmer, who is the assistant vice president for mission integration. In the middle is Sister Jacinta, who is one of my colleagues in the department, where she is an assistant professor of theology. Beside her, Sister Carol Meyers, professor of chemistry. And on the end, Sister Mary Govert, support for alumni relations. Sisters.
Okay, I'm first. We have had this picture up here, and you'll see more about that later. This is a picture that was unveiled at her beatification, so we put it here just as an opening. My part of this is to give a short life of the Mother Maria Theresia Bonzel, Blessed Mother Maria Theresia Bonzel. I like to leave out the word mother. We all know it gets to be a very long name. The longer version is the book He Leads, I Follow. It's one of the books that's a biography of her life. So this is kind of breaking down a little bit from that. She was born on the Feast of the Stigmata of St. Francis, September 17th, 1830. I think that really prefigures her destiny. There's one of, I think, like Giotto's pictures of, or somebody's picture, of the Stigmata of St. Francis. And she was born in a town called Olpa, Germany. Here are just a few scenes from Olpa. Over here you have the town wall that exists from medieval times and a tower. Part of that is still left. Here's kind of a typical street and grocery store. And here is, in the town square, there is this bronze cast of a man who was making frying pans, which apparently was a major means of making money during that time. It's a beautiful statue. I thought, why would they make a pan, why would they make a bronze for such a thing? But that was the major industry at Olpa in that time. She was born in Olpa in the Sauerland. The Sauerland is a very beautiful part of Germany. Sour because it's pine trees that drop their needles and make a very acid soil. There's the Biggessee River flowing through, which was a part of her life. This is her birthplace and home. I showed this at about an hour ago to a group of Franciscans that I was working with, and they said, did she live on top of a market? And I said, no. She lived in the whole house. They were a very rich family, one of the rich families of Olpa. And the community has been trying to get this building back as a memorial place, and they are not willing to sell it because they have a grill and market. So that's where she was born, and that grill and market is absolutely next to the church of the town. She could step out of her door and step into the church. I didn't get a real good view of the church, but this is St. Martin's Church, not the church that she worshiped in because that burnt down, but it was built again in the same place, and a very important part of Olpa, Germany. And if you excuse the time stamps on the pictures, that's for my sake. I wasn't thinking of using those when I put that on. Helped me know where I was on what day and what I saw. Her parents were Edmund Bonzel and Mother Maria Anna. Around here we very often talk of the building across the road, across the campus, as Bonzel Hall, but the Germans prefer the pronunciation Bonzel, so that's what I use. And I continue to try changing that on campus. She was the oldest daughter. There was one other daughter in the family. Her name was Regina Christina Wilhelmine, but she was called Aline. Or as the Germans would talk about her when we were over there, they pronounced it Alina. So that's the only name that I've really known about her until I read the longer version of her name. The family was very wealthy. They didn't live atop a store. They lived in what was considered to be a very beautiful house in those days. Early tragedy, though. Her father died when she was only 5 years old. Lifespan wasn't always long for people in those days. He was only 29 years of age. But his presence was replaced by her Uncle Arnold. Uncle Arnold was a celibate single man who was living a spiritual life as a lay person, and he had a great devotion to the Eucharist. So in many ways, he replaced the father figure in her life and was very much a counselor and spiritual counselor for her and a father. Her vocation, where did it come from? It started at her first communion, perhaps started before that. But when we think of first communion, we think of little 7- and 8-year-olds in cutie little dresses. But in the early 18th century, she was born, well, mid-18th, she was born in 1830. She probably didn't make her first communion until she was at least 12, perhaps older. This precedes Pius X's renewal of devotion to the Eucharist. In fact, people didn't go to communion very often, and you didn't make first communion until you got older. So she was at least 12. I was saying in the last presentation, when our community started in 1863, the first statute said the postulants could go to communion once a week, novices twice, professed sisters 3 or 4 times. And the only people who could receive communion daily were the very devout with the permission of their confessor and the superior. So that gives you an idea of what Eucharistic spirituality was in the 19th century. On the day of her first communion, she says, without quite realizing it, I was saying over and over again, "O Lord, I am your victim. Take me as your holocaust. Do not reject me." That's a way of giving herself to God. In 19th century terms of spirituality, we don't use Holocaust and victim that much anymore, but the same kind of meaning. She wanted to give her life to God. After she finished what the school possibilities in Olpe, she graduated from there. She went to a boarding school in Cologne. Cologne's only about 50 miles west of Olpe. I really would have liked to have had the Beatification in that gorgeous cathedral in Cologne, but that's a different diocese, so our Beatification was in Paderborn, much farther north than Cologne was. She went to Cologne to a boarding school with the Ursulines, and when she finished that, she came back to Olpe because her family was wealthy and into society. She entered society as a debutante, but yet she didn't want that kind of life. She wanted to give her life to God. Her mother, despite her own piety, her mother was a religious woman, but did not want to give up her oldest daughter to enter any kind of community. So there was a struggle between the two, as my mother and I struggled many things. Okay, it happens. When her mother consented, finally she made an attempt to join an existing community, the Salesians. I'm not familiar with them in this country at all, but obviously the female group. I've known some men in the men's group. Named after St. Francis de Sales. So she got her bags packed and she's ready to go, and the next morning she's very sick. Some sort of kind of staph infection. It had this great big long name that I tried to find out what it was. But she had ill health much of her life. So she wasn't able to go, so she unpacked her bags and stayed home and waited for something else to happen. Finally, she founded a small community, founded a new community with 2 of her friends. One of them was Regina Lescher. Regina was from another very prominent, wealthy family in Olpe. Clara Fender was a member of another community, whose name escapes me right now, but she was not happy with the spirituality. That was not her call. She felt like she wanted something different. So she received permission and was dispensed from her vows in that community. And so she came with the wisdom of how a community operates, though. And so she and Regina and Aline formed this new community. Their statutes were based on the Augustinian rule. Maria Theresia didn't like that. Aline didn't like that. She wanted to become a Franciscan. It always amazes me because we have so many resources on Francis today, and they had so few really good resources. But she knew the Franciscan spirituality, And that's what she wanted. But Clara was the dominant one because of her experience. They had an Augustinian rule. Here's a picture of Clara in the community that she eventually founded. When I was reading about her and her community, they say that she started with a Franciscan rule. So now I'm really confused at who's telling the truth here. But I've always heard in many sources I find that the initial group started with an Augustinian rule, and Evelyn did not like that. So there's friction in Olpe. Dissension arose in Olpe. This new group starts, and there are some Vincentian sisters in Olpe who do nursing, and they don't like it that these people were doing some home nursing. So the bishop finally approved that the community would move their headquarters to Salskotten, which is about 50 miles north of Olpe. We had a chance to see that. Someone drove us through the town just to give an idea of the convent there and of the group that actually broke off from us. There was a lot of disagreement about that because the Loescher family and the Bonzel family were the money for the new community. They bought the houses and they made the provisions. And if you left Olpe, you were leaving those two families who had generously supported you in your beginnings. But the community moved. After they moved, there's still friction between the two groups in Salskotten and Olpe. I know it's amazing that religious groups can argue with each other, but it happened. And so they were having some friction about who should do what and who should, they didn't want them, some didn't want them to move to Salskotten, and some looked down on the people in Olpe. The bishop stepped in and said, this has got to stop. So eventually it made two communities, one in Salskotten, which was headed by Clara Fender, and the one in Olpe, Maria Theresia, was made the head of that community in 1863. It's 150 years ago. We consider that the beginning of our congregation. So earlier this year, we had our 150th celebration of a congregation. So that's the date that we treasure as the beginning of our congregation with Aline Bonzel, Maria Theresia. By this time, she'd been given that name. She founded now she could found the community based on the Franciscan rule. Clara Fender remained in Salskotten, and the community today is found in the Franciscan Sisters, Daughters of the Sacred Hearts of Jesus and Mary. That's even longer than Sisters of Perpetual Adoration. That's a very long name. They are most often called in this country the Wheaton Franciscans. They are centered in Wheaton, Illinois. So there are some among us. An interesting fact was that many years ago, in about 10, 15 years ago in Germany, these two communities had never come together. Were enemies, they just didn't. And so they had a celebration where the sisters from Salskotten came down to Olpe and they had a great big party. So if there were any unresolved issues, it was covered over. More than my time. New community in Olpe cared for orphans, still doing that today. They did home nursing, still resisted by the Vincentians. They'd also set up some nursing centers outside of Olpe. They nursed troops during the Franco-Prussian War in 1870-71. But then came the Kulturkampf, the culture struggle. Someone just looked up the word for me. It was begun by Chancellor Otto von Bismarck in 1871. Its aims were to suppress the power of the church. One of my favorite pictures, there's Otto von Bismarck and the Pope playing chess, power play over the nation of Germany. But what effect it had on our community, it was a restriction of the church in general, but our community was forbade to accept new ministries or to accept new candidates. So this community, which is about 8 years old, is dead in the water if they are to stay there. They cannot accept candidates or open new ministries. So they can just sit there and wait till Otto dies, I guess, I don't know. Her solution was revolved around Bishop Dwenger, the Bishop of Fort Wayne. He requested that sisters come to the United States. After the Kulturkampf began, many Franciscan priests and others fled to the United States. Some landed in the Diocese of Fort Wayne, which is the whole of Indiana. And they said, there's plenty of sisters who want to find some work to do in Germany. So Bishop Dwenger went to Europe and went to the Mother House and requested sisters. So her response was to send 6 sisters to Lafayette, which is in the Fort Wayne Diocese, in 1875. They began nursing immediately in the house in which they lived. They came pretty much destitute without any money, and nobody met them at the train in the middle of the night, but they found them a place to live, and then they started nursing and becoming a community. They built, a year later, a hospital in Lafayette. They started teaching the children of immigrants at St. Boniface School in 1877, and we're still there today. Mother Teresa often continued to send sisters to the United States. Now, she was not allowed to accept sisters, but she did in secret. Little sneaky person she was, and she accepted sisters in secret, invested them, and then later put them in lay clothing, took them to the boat, sent them to the United States, where they would put their habits on again and go to work. And she was not, her ministry was not to be stopped by the chancellor. She came to the United States on 3 different occasions. The last one, I believe, is in 1891. She had health problems all her life, so you can imagine what the trip was on a boat, then on a train, and carriages, and whatever else were needed to get her to the various places. But she came because she wanted to help the community to become stronger. Her concern for the sisters in the United States is shown in her letters. We have a lot of her letters extant. And I have a couple quotes here. And these are in regard to the sisters who are in the United States working too hard, she said. "How are you and all the dear sisters? Write to me soon or I will be anxious. As I can see from your letters, my dear sisters, many of you are weak and sickly, and all of you are overburdened with work. It truly pains me." There's a lot of sympathy in all of her letters. "Poor Sister Fidelis seems very ill, and I feel so sorry for her. May the dear Lord give her her strength." And you could find multiple examples like that as she wrote back and forth with the sisters. As far as her leadership was concerned, she's not like a real Clara Fender. I always assumed was a much more strong, dominant woman. Much of her life was ill, yet she continued to lead. She continued to be elected even when she didn't wish to be. My words for her are a strong will with a very soft presence. She got what she wanted. She developed ministries, but she had a very strong, soft presence about her. She was concerned that the rapid growth in America would not allow for seasoned sisters to guide the younger ones. Here's some examples of her style. "It is always a question," these are from her letters, "it's always a question of the superior. If she is supportive, then all things are easy. I experienced that here with Sister Angela. For those to be invested, use the following names." The general always determined what the names would be, even in the United States. Sister Mary Pia of St. Joseph, Sister Anastasia of St. Joseph, Sister Mary Ephraim of St. Joseph. She had a great devotion to St. Joseph because she would put notes under the statue to get buildings and health and whatever else the community needed. But after she assigns all these names, she says, "Should you prefer a different name for one or the other, it's okay with me." So, she wasn't I never sensed any kind of dictatorial spirit about her. She was reelected for 1904 for her last term, which she resisted. She died in 1905. She was extremely ill by that time, but they would not elect anybody else until after her death. So these are some views from a display at Olpe in the Mother House. They have the original furniture that was in her bedroom over here. And you can see a side view of the bed. It was slit open to show that it was straw inside, very simple lodgings they had. And also of her office. She didn't have Venetian blinds, but she did have this wonderful desk, this small chair that I don't think anybody could get into, even the smallest postulate tried to sit in it. I don't know what it was for. Maybe kids came in to see her. And a prie-dieu and crucifix where she prayed. She was ill throughout her life, heart disease. She often speaks of being confined in bed. I've mentioned that before. The last shot is some of the medals she received from the government. The Emperor William II bestowed on her the Order of the Red Cross. And I find this a real strange irony with the contrast with her treatment during the Kulturkampf. Because of the way they nursed during the Franco-Prussian War and other things that she did for the society and for nursing, she was recognized by the Chancellor. Okay, thank you.
Let me begin with a little geography. Olpa is the place where the Sisters of St. Francis of Perpetual Adoration began, and we're still there. It's marked by the letter A, and you see it's located in this spot in Germany, kind of in the northwest. And here's Cologne, and it's mostly east of Cologne and a little bit north of it. I would like to quote from a book, From the Wounds of St. Francis. The opening of that book describes it. Near the southwestern boundary of the German province of Westphalia, amid the gentle rolling hills of the Sauerland mountains, where the brooklet Bigge sends its babbling waters through the fertile meadows, lies the quaint and medieval city of Opa, with a population of 6,000. Remember, this is 1925 that this is being written. It's from the book that was translated in 1955 by Sister Friedan and Sister Honora, From the Wounds of St. Francis. Today's population is about 26,000. What you see below there is scenes of the mother house. So it's a very beautiful place. Now, could such a small city become known because of the good works and holiness of one of its citizens? That's a question I ask. Well, Opa has a central fountain, and there you see the picture of the central fountain, and it recognizes the heroes and events and the history of the town. In our visit to Germany, celebrating the 150th Jubilee of the founding of the community, we saw the footprints of Mother Maria Theresa Bonzel, still remembered and venerated in Opa. So from small beginnings, her community has grown to an international community with presence in the United States, Germany, Philippines, and Brazil. And here then is the plaque that's on this fountain, and here's the plaque. It's interesting to note that around 500 sisters over the years have been sent from Germany to America. The Beatification is a day of great joy for all of us, and it deepens our understanding of our own call to religious life. The members had grown to about 1,500 sisters at the time of Mother Maria Theresa Bonzel's death. Today we are members of this international community. You see the flags on the General 8 when we were welcome in July for the 150th celebration of Germany, Brazil, United States, and Philippines. Okay. The primary charism is the adoration of the Eucharist, and it's been the underlying strength that has spawned many different works of charity. Now, no one living has encountered Mother Maria Theresa in person. You'd have to be about 122 years old. So how do we know about her life and times? Well, we have letters she has written, and we know, and she knew all the sisters personally, and she kept close correspondence, giving direction, showing concern, especially to the sisters in the United States. We have biographies, documents about her life, and as a religious community, we keep something called chronicles, in which each convent yearly sends an account of their happenings during the year. So, but less easy to document are the unwritten stories that have been passed down. The first charitable work done by the sisters of the new community was the care of orphans, and it was the Scherholz home. And this is only a sketch of it from memory because it doesn't exist today, where Clara Vander, Aline Bonzel, and Regina Laser, they began their days of prayer. They had Eucharistic adoration. They lived in community, and their primary purpose was the Eucharistic adoration. However, one day, 4 children were brought to the convent for their care, and so they began caring for orphans. We still can see the sisters doing that from the picture of the orphanage in 1940 in Opa. So why was care of orphans so needed in Opa in the 1860s and 1870s? Well, here's what Germany looked like in 1815. It was a jumble of loosely associated states. You can see the states would eventually make up the German Empire. However, Opa happens to be up there where the star is in the Prussia part of Germany, and the strongest state is down here. It's Austria. And France was by far the largest country, and just after Napoleon had come to great strength, and Italy and Germany were just these little states with no strength. So the first thing that happened was 1966. We have war declared. It's called the Austro-Prussian War, And that only lasted 7 weeks. And Prussia defeated Austria. And of course, with that unification, those two big states together, that was nearly Germany unified. Although far from Olpa, what was the influence? Well, Olpa was an industrial center, and it had metals and iron and industries that depended on it. And the Prussian army was a modernized army. It had a superior rifle, and they moved quickly by rail. So in this short time, they won the war over Austria, and Prussia now effectively unified Germany. Now what this did, they turned to challenge France. And so we have the Franco-Prussian War, 1870, 1871. And the front of that was near Olpa. A victory here was resulted in a high number of casualties, but it united Germany. And Otto von Bismarck won out in unifying Germany. I also have a picture of Bismarck, and also of Benedict X, who was the last pope over the papal states. And so both Germany and Italy are united by this time. After unification, Germany, politics turned to strengthen the internal affairs, and the church was seen as an enemy. Kulturkampf suppressed the clergy, but Mother Maria Theresia wisely found a way around it. She found ways to help the orphanage and to continue to support the growth of the community. Of course, here's the picture of the first 6 sisters that came to the United States. That's supposed to be the train station in Lafayette. Okay. So with these arrangements, the care of orphans was able to be continued. Just briefly, I'm looking at the second reason. So the casualties of the war left many orphans, and the second reason, of course, is the kind of work that they did. Tinsmithing was very harmful to the health, and so the life expectancy of the workers was very short, and this resulted, of course, in many orphans also. You can see from these pie-shaped charts, they talked about what is the industry, and you see this big pie shape. That's where the concentration of the industrial revolution and the working with iron, metal, mining, all that, and that's right near Olpa. Okay. Well, does care for orphans continue today? Mother Maria Theresia in 1902 set up a foundation called the Charitable Society of the Franciscan Sisters in Olpa, or briefly, the GFO. The diagram shows the GFO is present in 20 locations, 40 facilities, and 8,000 employees. And this kind of gives a little bit of the geography. Here's Olpa, and then all of these. What kind of facilities? They were nursing homes, hospitals, homes for children with special care as needed, for the handicapped and the ill children, as well as wards of the state. And one of the houses is in Olpa. It's called the Balthasar House, and it's a hospice for children with terminal illnesses and their families. And they've received many awards for their innovative programs of helping parents and children deal with the illness of the child and their death. Another is the Joseph Haus, which is a short walk from the Mother House, and the Mother House is also the location of the headquarters of GFO. There are several small houses and buildings with housing and programs for severely handicapped children or children who temporarily had to be removed from their homes. We see Sister Petra and Magdalene with Sister Clarice from the Western Province. They're presenting a bouquet to Magdalena because that day it happened to be her name day. And she's in charge of the Joseph Haus. The small boy on the left was perfectly normal until he got spinal meningitis, and he's unable to be cared for by his parents. So he's being cared for. And of course, he's a little, I wanted to adopt this one. It's so cute. Anyway, these are children that were temporarily, but the families are being helped, and they'll probably be returned to their families. So the GFO is doing lots of continuing the work of caring for orphans and children. Finally, this is Ingo Morel, the CEO of the GFO. I love all these letters, CEO of GEFO. And I think about how pleased Mother Maria Theresia would be that such wonderful works and charitable services of this foundation she founded, wisely founded in 1902. And the portrait shows Mother Maria Theresia as a founder of the congregation. I picked this one because it shows the, kind of emphasize that she's a founder of the congregation. And her vision and care is felt today through the GFO and the sisters and their work. We can be sure in her beatification, she is a powerful intercessor for the needs we have today, and we continue to invite others to seek her intercession. Blessed Mother Teresa Bonzel.
Okay, I would like to share just a little bit about Blessed Maria Theresia's spiritual life, particularly her devotion to Jesus and the Eucharist, and how she saw the Eucharist as the Sacred Heart of Jesus. And to follow that, I'll say a little bit about her devotion to the way of the cross. As Sister Mary mentioned, the Bonzel family home was right next to St. Martin's Church, and it's there that she received her first Holy Communion around the age of 14. And just to kind of reiterate this description of her First Communion again, she spoke about Jesus' overwhelming love for her in her heart. And she describes it this way: "On the day of my first Holy Communion, I was unspeakably happy. Before that, I was a very vivacious child, ready to take part in every prank. But after I received the Lord into my heart and returned to my place in the church, an indescribable feeling came over me. In the joy I experienced, but one thought filled my whole being. As Jesus had given himself entirely to me, I must give myself entirely to him. Without really knowing what I was saying, I repeated over and over again, 'O Lord, I am your victim. Accept me as your victim. Do not reject me.' This prayer silenced every other thought and raised me to a state of indescribable blessedness." And it might surprise us that she called herself Jesus' victim, but it was an expression of surrender. She understood that Jesus had given himself totally to her, and especially by laying down his life on the cross, and she wanted to give herself totally to him. And she could only give herself in love to Jesus because she had been so profoundly touched by his love. As Sister Mary mentioned, her father died when she was young, and so she looked to her father's brother, her Uncle Arnold. And Uncle Arnold used to take part in the Eucharistic processions that flow from the Mass and prolong the experience of adoring the Lord in the Eucharist. And so Uncle Arnold's holiness and his devotion to the Eucharist greatly influenced Eline. As a young woman, she developed a heart condition that continued through her whole life, but even so, she was able to accomplish much, and she looked to Jesus in the Eucharist to be her source of strength. Consequently, she made sure that the Eucharist was the center of her community and the source of its strength. It was important to Mother Maria Theresia that her new congregation would have perpetual adoration in its name, and that adoring Jesus in the Blessed Sacrament would be the most important work of the sisters, the one from which all other endeavors would flow. Not only is this explained in the earliest statutes of the congregation, but Mother Maria Theresia continued to emphasize this understanding in her letters. She wrote to the sisters, "Be zealous in keeping the hours of adoration before the Blessed Sacrament. Among all the apostolates which the congregation offers to us, this is the first and the highest. Our other works will reflect whether we are faithful or unfaithful in this matter. Never neglect the hour of love before the most blessed sacrament, and be assured that you will never depart from the Sacred Heart of Jesus without great grace and increased virtue. This example and others like it indicate that Mother Maria Theresia recognized the Blessed Sacrament as the Sacred Heart of Jesus. Jesus' gift of himself in the consecrated bread and wine is the same offering of his own body and blood, made from the pierced heart, a pierced heart overflowing with love as he hung on the cross. We also see in this example that contemplative adoring of Jesus is the way to be specially filled with his love, a love that is meant to be given to all through our actions. This advice is especially relevant today, when daily life is filled with much activity. Balance, strength, and joy are found by contemplating Jesus' amazing presence in the Eucharist. In another letter, she wrote, "To belong to an order whose mission is perpetual adoration is a grace that we can never appreciate enough. Oh yes, uncountable graces are bestowed upon us by God in these silent hours of adoration. Let us faithfully fulfill this sacred obligation, for then we may confidently approach our last hour on earth. With grateful hearts, we will then continue for all eternity what is now our most cherished occupation, adoration of God." Thankfully, today, Eucharistic adoration is practiced not only in religious communities, but has become a part of the life of many parishes. More so today than 20 years ago, the young women who come to our community have already experienced Eucharistic adoration and deeply appreciate this gift. Okay. I would also like to share about Blessed Mother Theresia's meditation on the way of the cross. First, a little background. Christian pilgrims have walked the way of Jesus' cross through Jerusalem since the earliest years of Christianity. Since 1342, when the Franciscan friars were given custody of the sacred sites in the Holy Land, the way of the cross has been connected with Franciscans who especially promoted this devotion. In the 1700s, it became common for every Catholic Church to post a set of stations of the cross for meditation on Jesus' passion and death. Blessed Maria Theresia made this devotion her own and typically prayed it daily. Every Friday, the way of the cross was prayed together in the community. It's been documented that whenever Mother Maria Theresia had a particularly serious prayer intention, she would leave the convent at 4 o'clock in the morning and walk barefoot to the hill of the cross overlooking Olpa, where she proceeded through the countryside, meditating on Jesus' passion at each station. She was back in chapel before community morning prayer began, and she kept quiet about this and did not discuss her practice with the sisters. Those of us who went to Germany this past July for our Founding Day 150th celebration, we were able to walk this same way of the cross that you see in the photographs here on the hill and through the countryside. And we each took turns leading a meditation at each station. And some of the sisters who just returned from Olpa also had this opportunity. Meditating on the sufferings of Christ gives us heartfelt gratitude for all that Jesus did for us, and it's a way to receive strength to carry our own crosses with his help, and it deepens our compassion for our suffering brothers and sisters who bear the image of the crucified Christ today. Mother Maria Theresia had heavy crosses to carry in leading the community and in dealing with her physical ailments, yet she faithfully and joyfully kept going with the strength provided by Christ.
We're going to fast forward a little bit historically. Sister Mary and Sister Carol talked a lot about the history of Mother Maria Theresia and the community. And I'm going to fast forward now to 1998. In September of 1998, 4-year-old Luke Berge of Colorado Springs, Colorado, became seriously ill after just beginning preschool. A gastrointestinal condition which caused severe pain and violent bouts of diarrhea 8 to 10 times a day baffled the doctors, who could neither diagnose nor alleviate it. Confined to his bed, the little boy stopped growing, rapidly lost weight, and began to waste away. As the disease progressed over the next 6 months, his parents, Jan and Mike Berge, began to fear the worst. Luke was the youngest of the Berge children, which included his sister Jill and his brother Tim. Describing her Catholic family as just ordinary and not ultra-holy, Jan Berge was at a loss as to what to do for her son until her daughter Jill told about Sister Evangeline, who had visited her class at St. Patrick's Catholic School. A sister of St. Francis of Perpetual Adoration living at the Mother House in Colorado Springs, Sister Evangeline had told the children how the sisters not only worked with with the sick and the poor, but that they also prayed before the Blessed Sacrament for the needs of the church and the world. And this is a picture of the Mother House Chapel at Colorado Springs, Colorado. Not long after Jill came home and told about Sister Evangeline and her companion, Sister Margaret Mary Priester, who is pictured here to the left, visited Luke in the Berge home. Praying with the boy and the family, they promised to continue their prayers before the Blessed Sacrament, adding that they would enlist the help of their foundress of the community, Mother Maria Theresia Bonzel, to intercede to God for a complete cure for Luke. Along with other sisters at the Mother House, Sisters Evangeline and Margaret Mary stormed heaven with a novena to Mother Maria Theresia, and they continued to visit the family, assuring them of their prayerful support. On February 22nd, 1999, the last day of the novena, Luke abruptly got out from the couch where he had been lying and began to play with his toys, just as if he had never been ill. While he continued to behave as a normal 5-year-old, Luke, to this day, does not remember either being sick or becoming suddenly well. His doctors were just as baffled about his sudden cure as they had been about his illness, and the sisters believed that God had miraculously cured the boy through Mother Maria Theresia's intercession. Convinced of the power of their foundress as a heavenly intercessor, and knowing that the declaration of a miracle through her intercession was necessary for beatification, the case was submitted to the local bishop for ecclesiastical investigation. Over the next 14 years, Luke and his family and the doctors who had treated him were rigorously subjected to repeated interviews and medical examinations. Medical records were scrutinized, and every shred of evidence was inspected by the church officials and the doctors, whose purpose was to determine the validity or not of the claim that the cure was rapid, complete, and utterly inexplicable by ordinary means. The evidence was compiled and submitted to the Vatican, and on March 27, 2013, Pope Francis approved the first decrees from the Congregation for the Causes of the Saints. Among them was a decree of miracle, acknowledging a miracle attributed to the intercession of Mother Maria Theresia Bonzel for Luke Berge. It was this miracle which made possible Mother Maria Theresia's beatification. That's Luke today. He's a BMX racer.
I had a handout for you to take a look at that outlines the beatification process. That's more general. I'm going to just walk through the process as it was historically, as it proceeded, over the years. When Mother Maria Theresia passed away on February 6th in 1905, she was already considered a woman of extraordinary holiness. The body of Mother Maria Theresia was originally laid to rest in St. Martin's Cemetery in Olpa and remained there for 25 years. On September 17th, 1930, Mother Theresia's remains were exhumed from St. Martin's Cemetery, were found to be intact, and were transferred to the new chapel in the garden of the Generalate. Here, the sisters could easily stop to pray at her graveside. Mother Paula, who followed Mother Maria Theresia, kept her memory alive and taught her spiritual heritage to the sisters, but she did not introduce the beatification process. She felt the need to distance herself and the sisters from Mother Theresia's remarkable example. Mother Paula also was suffering from a serious illness and died in 1914. Mother Verena was urged to initiate the process of beatification, but she hesitated because there were no miracles. Actually, many prayers had been answered, but they were not recognized because no one thought to record them. Mother Fabiana devoted herself to rebuilding the congregation, which had suffered much during World War II. Mother Francesco had always been interested in Mother Maria Theresia's and talked about her holiness and spirituality to many of the older sisters who lived with her. She hesitated also to begin the process because so many decades had already passed, necessitating an historic process, which is extremely difficult and often ends in failure. After some encouragement, Mother Francesco presented the matter to the General Council, and on July 27, 1961, the Council presented the petition to the Archbishop of Paderborn. Archbishop Jaeger published an official diocesan paper on September 18, 1961, announcing the opening of the introductory proceedings of the beatification process. All writings of Mother Maria Theresia were to be forwarded to the Episcopal Chancery Office. The Archbishop made preparations for the beginning of the informative process that hopefully would soon lead to her beatification. A general postulator, Dr. Carioli, was appointed to serve as the official petitioner in Rome, and Father Eilers was designated as his representative or vice postulator in Paderborn. Father Eilers drew up a list of all witnesses, and at this time there were about 60 sisters still living who had lived with Mother and knew her personally. He interviewed all the witnesses regarding the life and work of the servant of God, carefully testing their statements as to their genuineness and their value in the process of beatification. He accumulated a document of 173 articles which demonstrated Mother Theresia's historic degree of virtue. He had the articles printed and submitted to the Vicar General in Paderborn in March 1964, and the first session of the informative process took place in Paderborn on July 20th, 1964. The proceedings at the ecclesiastical court are similar to those at a civil court of law. The life and work of the servant of God, Mother Maria Theresia Bonzel, would be scrutinized like that of a civil defendant. Father Eilers, the vice postulator who prepared the material, became the defense counsel in the name of the congregation. There were several setbacks during the beatification process. The first was the death of Father Eilers, who worked closely with the sisters from the very beginning. Dr. Schaefer replaced Father Eilers. December 20th, 1967 was the date for the transfer of the remains of Mother Maria Theresia from the small chapel on the grounds of the original Mother House to the recently erected chapel at the new Mother House on the outskirts of Olpa. One of the actions required by canon law was, as part of the process, is the exhumation and verification of the mortal remains of the person. The remains of Mother Theresia were then placed in a new casket. A document was prepared containing the important data about her life, the report of placing her in a new casket, and the transferal and internment at the new chapel. The document of 1930, when her body was removed from St. Martin's Cemetery, was well preserved, and it was also put into the new casket. On January 5th, 1968, the casket was brought to the chapel at the new Mother House. After Mass was celebrated, a procession took the casket to the new burial vault. It turned out to be a very snowy day. Pathfinders with burning torches escorted the procession to the new burial chapel. Here, the casket was then lowered into the new grave. An engraved marble marker was removed from the old burial chapel and placed on top of the new vault in the new chapel. Mother Maria Theresia remained there from 1967 until 2013. Here, the sisters and many of the laity would come daily to pray at the feet of our foundress. The task of the informative process were concluded on February 14, 1969. All documents had to be copied and prepared for the apostolic process in Rome. Sister Hildegardis and Sister Laetitia were deputized to do this. The original copies were kept sealed in the Episcopal archives in Paderborn. The official conclusion of the informative process took place on July 29, 1970 in Paderborn, and with Cardinal Jaeger presiding. All the documents of the process filled 5 large volumes. On September 16, 1970, the materials were delivered to Rome, but before the cause of Mother Maria Theresia could begin, the materials had to be translated into Italian. On December 20th, 1973, the Generalate was informed that the Acts had been translated. The apostolic process for beatification and canonization could now be set in motion. The papal congregation chose 2 expert theologians as consultors to study the writings of Mother Maria Theresia. On February 9, 1975, the theologians agreed that her teachings stressed the high degree of her extraordinary and historic virtues, her conscientious observance of the vows, and the soundness of her theology. On October 11, 1978, Father Hardick was appointed as vice postulator. His first duty was to write a summarium of the foundress. This would be her biography based on the documents preserved in the Chancery in Paderborn and at the Mother House. This would be submitted to the papal congregation for beatification and canonization and would again have to be translated. On January 8, 1986, the community was informed that a new general postulator in Rome had to be appointed. This news was another disappointment to the congregation, as Father Caroli had become very familiar with all the material. Father Hardick completed the work of the summarium, and it was delivered to the general postulator on May 10, 1991. Other historical work of the Positio was not finished until 1995 and then had to be submitted to the Congress of Historics, which in 2002 submitted to the Congregation of Saints. The death of Father Hardick was another loss for the congregation. He will always be remembered, as was noted earlier, as the author of He Leads, I Follow, and for his contributions to the beatification of Mother Maria Theresia. Father Andre Ambrosi was appointed as the new general postulator, shown here with Pope Benedict XVI. He carefully followed the preparation of the Positio, which is examined by 9 theologians. If the majority of the theologians are in favor, the cause is passed on for examination by cardinals and bishops, who are members of the Congregation of Saints. The Congregation of Saints then presents the results of the process to the Holy Father, who authorizes the promulgation of the decree of venerable. Finally, Mother Maria Theresia was declared venerable on March 27, 2010. What was still needed for the beatification was a miracle verified after her death. And Sister Anita told the story of Luke, so I'm going to just kind of flip through this. There you see a picture of Luke as a 4-year-old, and here is Luke today. On Wednesday, March 27th, as was noted, Pope Francis approved the first decree from the Congregation for the Causes of Saints, including that of Mother Maria Theresia, which paved the way for her beatification, which was scheduled to take place on November 10th, 2013 in Paderborn, Germany. Once again, the body of Venerable Mother Maria Theresia was exhumed on August 10th, 2013, and relics were taken. The new casket with the remains of Mother Maria Theresia was made available at the Mother House to be venerated by the sisters and others. A vigil celebration took place on November 9th, 2013 at the Market and University Church in Paderborn as a special preparation for the beatification. Mother Maria Theresia was officially accepted into the circle of the Blessed of the Catholic Church at the Cathedral of Paderborn on November 10th, 2013. Angelo Cardinal Amato, the prefect of the Congregation for the Process of Beatification and Canonization in Rome, presided at the Pontifical Mass. Among the concelebrants was Archbishop Hans Joseph Becker from Paderborn and Bishop Kevin Rhodes of the Diocese of Fort Wayne South Bend. During the beatification ceremony, Archbishop Becker and the postulator of the beatification process, Dr. Ambrosi, came forward to Angelo Cardinal Amato. Archbishop Becker then requested the beatification of Mother Maria Theresia. Sister Mediatrix gave an overview of the life of Mother Maria Theresia, after which the cardinal read the papal decree for the beatification. A picture of the new blessed was then unveiled, and relics of the new blessed were given to Cardinal Amato, to Archbishop Becker, and to Sister Magdalena. The body of Blessed Mother Maria Theresia was transferred from the Mother House to St. Martin's Church in Olpa to be buried in the new Adoration Chapel. A farewell Vesper service took place in the Mother House Chapel, at which all the sisters were present. The casket was then taken from the chapel and transported through the streets of Olpa to St. Martin Church. Here, the casket was welcomed at the entry of the church and then brought in and placed at the altar. A procession took the casket to the new Adoration Chapel, and the casket was lowered into the vault. Following the burial service, a pontifical mass was celebrated by Cardinal Paul Joseph Cordes with Archbishop Becker and Bishop Kevin Rhodes. The beatification process for Blessed Mother Maria Theresia, which was initiated in September 1961, when Archbishop Jaeger first asked for all of Mother's writings to be submitted to Paderborn, was now complete. It took 52 years and the consistent work and prayers of many of the sisters and others involved. For those of us who were able to participate in the ceremonies in Olpa and Paderborn, it was a time of special graces and blessings. What is most important is that each of us continue to serve, to strive to imitate Blessed Mother Maria Theresia's heroic virtues, using her as a model for our own lives. Blessed Mother Maria Theresia's feast day is February 9th, the day of her burial. The end. And we can leave that picture.
Thank you very much, sisters. We have a chance for people to pose questions of one or all of the sisters. We can bring the microphone around if you have interest in doing so.
I just want to know, did Luke or any of his family attend the service?
Yes, Luke and his family were at all of the services. They came to the receptions. We got to interact with them at the Mother House. Did they stay at the Mother House?
Yeah.
Okay, they stayed at the Mother House, so we did see them every day that we were there. And it was, I actually personally think it was a greater miracle for the parents, since Luke didn't remember, and he was there, but he was not there.
His mother said that throughout this whole 14-year ordeal, he didn't like all the press, he didn't like all the attention. You know, I mean, he was a typical young man, and having remembered none of the events, you know, he had a hard time understanding why people were making such a big deal out of this. I guess the other thing that was hard for his mom was, his mom is very devout, but the three children currently do not practice their faith. And so all the sisters knew this, And so we are praying to Mother Maria Theresia that she will make sure that at least he will eventually return to the practice of his faith.
Also, Mike Berge, the father of Luke, read a beautiful petition at the Beatification Mass. And so that's we have a clip of that, too, incidentally, too.
To exemplify Luke's attitude, someone said that maybe a greater miracle than his cure was that they were able to get him to come to open. And he never smiled, except the last couple of days he got real friendly. Someone said maybe it's because he started opening the kegs of beer. But he really mellowed as the days went on.
How many sisters are in the congregation now, and where are you throughout the world?
Total in the congregation, I'm going to say probably between 200 and 300, which is not a lot. There's one province in Germany, there are 2 provinces in the United States, and there is a province in the Philippines, and then the German sisters have 2 mission houses in Brazil. And there were representatives of all those areas that were present, both for the 150th anniversary this past summer, and also for the Beatification.
And also, I made mention that even though these are the provinces, the sisters have been many different places. They have been in Honduras for many years, in the bayous of Louisiana. They have been in New Mexico and Indian reservations. They have been in Vietnam doing some nursing during that war. So outside of the established provinces, they've served various places in the world.
I just wonder if you could just give just a few things that you think Mother Maria would want passed on in terms of her little keys to spirituality.
I think probably our dedication to prayer, as Sister Jacinta spoke, her dedication to the Eucharist, I mean daily Mass and prayer. I think prayer, of course, is the basis of all spirituality, so and that was what she practiced, so I would say that would be it. Our community combines the contemplative with the active life, so then from prayer comes service, and then you hear the many missions and ministries of the sisters, so serving others would naturally flow from that life of prayer.
And I think too, her motto, which was the title of that book, He Leads, I Follow, was certainly the key to her spirituality, because that indicated her relationship with God as, totally dependent on God, and just letting God be in control of her life, which is certainly the ideal for any Christian, but particularly if you're you're involved in ministry with other people.
I also, when I was in Germany, I met some of the sisters, and I was struck by Sister Petra, who said, Mother Maria Theresia is the reason I entered this community. I'm an only child, and Mother always had a wonderful liberal attitude about the sisters caring for their parents if they were in need, and for the families of the sisters, as opposed to kind of the standard of the time was to just sever yourself from the world and many contacts. And so that progressiveness, and in addition, the terrible struggles that she went through during the wars. I mean, imagine being the head of, well, it wasn't her, but her congregation had provinces on either side of the war. We weren't with Germany in World War I nor in World War II, but our generalate was there.
I think another thing that struck me was her care for suffering and the small people, for children and nursing. I visited 4 of the institutions of the GFO that Sister Carol was talking about: a hospice for dying children, a place for severely handicapped children, an orphanage, and a place for mothers and children, mothers and babies, people who early pregnancies or are alone and they need help to get stable, and they have 2 men there now, but they still call it the mother-child house. But and the people I met there who were in charge had been there 15, 20, 25 years, lay folks, who were so completely dedicated to what they were doing. And I walked back up the hill for lunch and I thought, would that have all happened without the charism of that woman who started that kind of ministry? And I think she teaches us a lot about caring for the poor and the dispossessed of society.
Another thing that stands out about her spirituality is what we call trust in divine providence. You see that written about quite a bit, just that when there were material needs, financial needs, whatever, it was like trust in divine providence. God is going to provide.
She had a great devotion to St. Joseph. We all had to go find the St. Joseph statue that is now at the Mother House, that used to be at Mulheim, where she would put her petitions under the statue, and in trust and faith, those prayers were answered.
And I might just mention about that statue, I had brought some written petitions from people with me to pray about, and the day before we left, I went to the statue thinking, oh, I'm just going to slip them under the statue. There were already like 20 papers under the statue, you know, so the sisters are still doing that. We're still entrusting our intentions to God through St. Joseph.
You may have just answered this, but can you speak to the significance of all of this for you as women living in the Diocese of Fort Wayne South Bend?
I think for me, it's almost indescribable. I mean, the whole beatification thing, but to be connected spiritually with a woman who has been recognized by the worldwide church for her heroic virtue and her ability to intercede for us is just amazing. And like Sister Elise said a few minutes ago, you know, it behooves us as her followers to continue the kinds of things that she did, you know, the compassion for those who suffer, and as well as devotion to the Eucharist and promoting Eucharistic adoration by our example and by, you know, attending as well. So, yeah.
Well, we have the same kind of ministries and quite a bit of presence in the Diocese of Fort Wayne South Bend, and Fort Wayne. So just to live those ministries and education, and mainly education in this diocese. We have a healthcare corporation that is in other areas. But for us sisters, our Mother House is in South Bend. It's in Mishawaka, so we're certainly an intricate part of the diocese. And I was impressed by Bishop Rhodes' presence. He came as probably the stand-in for Bishop Dwenger, who, you know, initially invited the sisters. But it was wonderful to see his presence there and his the honor that he felt it was to be a part of this celebration of the Beatification, and his participation with us, both at the Mother House and at the Pontifical Masses, etc. But I think for each of us, it's to look at, you know, to keep her life, and I think all of us have been renewed in our understanding and awareness of her life by this experience, by being able to attend the Beatification, by rereading He Leads, I Follow, by rereading her documents and her spirituality, so that we can then reflect that. And that's what she did, reflect it to those that we work with here or wherever we are, really.
I think too that when we got together in celebration, I was very impressed that one of the sisters said, I think Mother Maria Teresa must be really smiling on us getting together and enjoying each other. And Sister Marilyn and Sister Mary and myself, Sister Diane, we met our classmates in Germany, 5 of them for the very first time. And so I just think the more of a feeling of universality for the community. And also I do remember that Mother Maria Teresa said, you work too hard. You should enjoy. So I remember that, and I think it was just appropriate that we could celebrate. I sense that a lot.
As blessed, she can be venerated locally, and in our particular locations. There's also an opportunity there are some prayer cards out there if you have petitions that you would like to pray for or about. I mean, one was answered and verified. That certainly doesn't mean that can't happen again. So I think faith that she is with the Lord and can intercede for us. That's a lesson that I think I'd like to be more aware of now that it is possible that she's blessed.
Louis has a question.
Building on the remarks you just made about the universality of the church you experienced of your the Sisters of St. Francis of Perpetual Adoration. I really enjoyed reading the cover story of Today's Catholic this past week with those remarks. I was wondering what that was like and if you look forward to doing it again for the canonization process.
I'm packed and ready to go.
I didn't add canonization, but it's on your paper as the next step, another miracle. And the process that goes through can take years, but it has to, as Sister Anita said, it was 1999 to, what was the year, 2010?
2013 before it was finally recognized.
2010 when it was, But anyway, there's another step, and it isn't that I haven't thought about that.
In regard to the universality, I was really struck. We were coming up on the bus from Frankfurt Airport, and they phoned ahead and said we were coming. So we had 3 young priests from the Diocese of Fort Wayne with us, Dan Scheidt and Ben Molenkamp and Jason Freiberger. And I wondered what their thoughts were. As we went into the building, there's this huge commotion of people speaking Portuguese, German, English versions of Philippine dialogues, hugging and kissing and screaming, and it was like, I bet these guys just stood there and went, because we were all one, and we didn't need to be able to understand each other's language at that point. And throughout, whenever there were petitions in the liturgy, at the canonization, at the Beatification liturgy, some petitions were given in English and German and native Filipino dialogue and Portuguese for the Brazil sisters. And in most of the ceremonies, they also remembered our Filipino sisters, because not only did it hit the Philippines, it hit exactly where our sisters ministered, right straight through, and did a lot of damage. And they didn't know about their families. They didn't know if our sisters were killed. And so that was kind of a sweet, sour thing to the whole event, but it brought all of us together in concern for that.
I don't know if this would be an appropriate time, but I don't know how many of you have seen, but we do have a video clip of the moment of the unveiling of her picture, and you get the sense of universality of the whole church. I don't know if we could show that now. If there are were there other questions? Well, let's show that short clip.
That might be a good ending.
And you could you could enjoy it.
Apostolisches Schreiben. Wir erfüllen den Wunsch unseres Bruders Hans-Josef Becker, des Erzbischofs und Metropoliten von Paderborn, einer großen Anzahl weiterer Brüder im Bischofsamt und vieler Christgläubiger, und gestatten nach Befragung der Kongregation für die Selig- und Heiligsprechungen aufgrund unserer apostolischen Autorität, dass die ehrwürdige Dienerin Gottes, Maria Theresia, mit weltlichem Namen Regine Christine Wilhelmine Bonzel, Jungfrau, Gründerin des Institutes der armen Franziskanerinnen von der ewigen Anbetung zu Olpe, die mit der innigen Betrachtung der göttlichen Geheimnisse eine eifrige Liebe zu den Armen und Leidenden verband, künftig Selige genannt wird. Und ihr Fest am 9. Februar an den Orten und in der Weise, wie sie durch das Recht festgelegt sind, jährlich gefeiert werden kann. Im Namen des Vaters und des Sohnes und des Heiligen Geistes. Amen. Gegeben zu Rom bei St. Peter am 4. November 2013, im ersten Jahr unseres Pontifikates, Franziskus, Papst.